All right, so we all think about energy when we're talking about, okay, how am I going to exercise? Or there's a new study that just came out that says if you know that you're going to be exercising this afternoon, you're going to eat more food at your meal before you exercise. So we think about energy and what energy we use when we're doing exercise, but really the majority of the energy we use when we're resting, just to do things like have our heart beat, have our brain function properly, have our digestive system work nicely. All of these things require energy. And you can see that the amount of energy that you use at rest is given in a percentage here underneath each of these different things. So just by thinking, our brain is going to use about 17% of the energy of our body at rest. Our heart, by beating, is going to use almost 10% of the energy we're using when we're resting. Our liver, as it's processing foods and getting rid of anything that could be potentially toxic to our body, cleaning out our blood and then processing the food that we've eaten, that's going to take about 20% of the energy. Our muscles at rest, just to be resting, use 20% of our total amount of energy. So we're using energy to do a variety of different things just to keep us at a baseline. So now that everybody's at home and everybody's in this restrict yourself to the house experience that we're going through right now, we're resting a lot more than we have in the past. So when we're resting, all of these tissues are still using energy. How much energy is going to be determined by kind of what things you're doing and what you're thinking. So the liver, we talked about, it uses almost 20% of the energy at rest. So when we just look at it when it's resting, or we look at the kidney, the heart, the brain, and skeletal muscle, look at how much of the energy it takes for our tissues just to make protein. Your liver is making proteins like albumin, which are going to circulate around and help carry the fat throughout your body. It's making other proteins that are going to be important for different functions within there. Our skeletal muscle are making proteins that are going to help regenerate, repair, and grow our muscles. Our kidney, our heart, other tissues, they're always making protein, and it takes between 5 and 20% of the energy depending on which tissue we're looking at. If we look at other things that are important, there's this thing called the sodium-potassium ATP. So what sodium-potassium ATPase is that's the enzyme. If you remember when we talked about how muscle contraction is stimulated when the brain sends a message, and that message is an electrical message that turns the negative muscle membrane into positive. The thing that keeps it negative is the sodium-potassium ATPase. It pumps out potassium really, really fast, and then lets it leak back in, pumps in potassium really, really fast, pumps out sodium, so the sodium's all on the outside, and then it lets the potassium leak out of the cell, and the result is that there's much less positive charge inside than there is outside. And so the muscle itself is negative. The same thing is going to be true for your brain, your heart, your kidney. These tissues all have to keep that negative charge in order for an electrical message, like a thought, to happen. And so in the brain, 50% of the energy is used to get you back to that negative charge. And if you just have a single action potential, a single message sent from one nerve to another nerve, that's going to use, look what this number is, 10 with 8 zeros of ATP. So look, let's try and put that into perspective. 1,000,000 is 10 to the power of 6. So that's 100 million ATP molecules just to have a single action potential that maybe is going to be a thought, or maybe it's going to cause a twitch in my muscle, or it's going to do something very, very small. It takes a boatload of ATP to do that. So that's a huge amount. So that's really, really important. Okay, so in the brain, we use most of the energy to keep this negative balance. The same thing is true in the kidney. In liver and muscle, we use most of the energy to make protein. So in the brain, we use most of our energy to keep this negative charge on the cell so that it can be excited so that you can pass a thought. Same thing is going to be true for kidneys, where we use the ATPase so that we can pump sodium in so that we don't pee out all of our sodium. So all of these different things are working in the background. But so the majority of ATP at rest is used for protein synthesis, and maintaining this negative charge is going to keep our cells excitable. All right? So again, most of the energy is going to come from this molecule ATP. And when we split a molecule of ATP, we are going to cut, and all it is adenosine, which I've got in the blue bubble here. And then there's 3 phosphates on here. And a phosphate is just a negatively charged molecule. So when we break ATP down, like when myosin is going to reach again, and it's going to cause the ATP to become ADP, and there's going to be this little inorganic phosphate that's going to come out, that's going to be our uncharged battery. And all we've done is we've used the energy from this reaction to do an action potential, synthesize protein, contract our muscle. Now we've got ADP. Now we have to recharge that to make it into ATP. And so the real question is, what do we use to recharge that? And what we use to recharge that is going to be the fuel that we take in. So when we look at this, we all think that our activity is going to be the primary thing that we need to eat for. That most of the energy that we're going to use in our body throughout the day is going to be running around, doing our physical activity. But the reality is 80% of the energy we use is actually energy that is not related to our physical activity. 70% of that's due to our basal metabolic rate. That's our protein synthesis. That's our sodium potassium currents. That's all of those different things that we talked about. 10% of it is thermogenesis, making enough heat to keep us warm. If we go into a cold environment, we're going to need more energy for maintaining our body temperature. And only 20% on average for most individuals is going to be from physical activity. So 20% of the energy you use in a day is from physical activity. If you start to exercise more and you do a concerted exercise program and you start training, or you're an athlete and you are training multiple times a day, now that physical activity component becomes bigger, but still the majority of the energy you need to take in is related to your basal metabolic rate, not due to the activity that you do. So this is the minimum amount of energy that you need to keep your body functioning.